Not every graduate wears a cap and gown. Some wear feathers brown, speckled, slightly ruffled by the wind, and walk with a kind of quiet dignity that doesn't need tassels or trumpets. Some take no selfies, sign no yearbooks, and yet somehow leave a presence behind more permanent than ink and photographs. This is the story of one such graduate. She came and went without ceremony at first, unnoticed by most, just another shape near the bleachers on misty spring mornings. But in time, and almost without meaning to, she walked her way into the rituals and rhythms of an entire school. Not loudly, never loudly. She preferred the margins, the edge of a soccer field, the shade near the lunch benches, the curve of the walking track no one used after sixth period. She was, in every way, a goose, and also, in some quiet way we still don't have words for, more than one dot at Millstone High, tucked into the edge of a town that catches fog and holds it until noon. The class of 2023 had 167 students, and also by the stubborn, unspoken agreement of nearly everyone who walked those halls a goose. They called her Gigi, though no one remembered exactly who said the name first. She simply became that. Gigi the goose, not a mascot, not a pet, a presence, a punctuation mark at the end of long days. But before the laughter, the social media posts, and the moment that made a few grown men tear up in the crowd of folding chairs and sun hats, before all of that she was a mystery. The kind you didn't try that hard to solve. Just a quiet moment people started to notice once they had enough time to look. This story is about her, about Gigi, but, like all good animal stories, it's also not about her at all. It's about present, about how someone or something can be part of your life without ever really being asked to be. About how, once in a while, the universe sends creatures into our lives who are not here to teach lessons, but to remain, to stand still when everyone else is moving fast, to exist without apology or explanation. Every school has its traditions, rallies and rivalries, clubs with loud posters, a bench everyone calls theirs, although no one remembers who claimed it first. But traditions, we sometimes forget, aren't always made. Sometimes they just show up one spring morning, nesting quietly beside the running track while fog still clings to the football field. And sometimes, when we let them stay, they grow into something almost sacred. By the time she walked across the stage, if we can really call it a walk, more of a waddling procession, as if pulled behind some invisible promise. The students had already woven her into the story they were telling, about themselves. Quietly, stubbornly, they had made space for a goose. For what that goose meant, her moment in the spotlight came suddenly and without cue. No announcements, no program note, just one more name was called at the end of the alphabet. One more. Graduate walked forward, an honorary member who had never opened a locker, never failed a math test, never skipped a class but had shown up every year without fail, and when she did, the crowd didn't cheer. Not at first. There was an inhale, a shared blink, a flicker of confusion, and then that wild, overwhelming wave of emotion that only happens when something pierces the armor we didn't know we wore. Laughter caught in the throat, applause that turned into something more, tears that had nothing and everything to do with a goose. But that comes later. For now, let's go back. Years before the stage and the crowd, before she had a name or an unofficial page in the yearbook. Let's return to where things begin, as they often do, without expectation or grand design. To an egg, left quietly beside the bleachers. as the world around it rushed on, unaware that legacy can sometimes be as simple as staying put. It wasn't supposed to be anyone's problem. An egg, barely visible in the straw-matted grass just beneath the lowest bleacher row, resting alone in the cool hush of early spring. The groundskeeper, a man named Clyde with knees that responded to weather forecasts better than local radio, noticed it first. He'd been dragging hoses across the field that morning, his breath clouding slightly in the air, which seemed odd for April. April should have been warmer, and yet his boots scuffed, something off color against the green. He bent down, expecting a piece of trash, and found instead a single large egg, tucked in a careful hollow. Clyde paused, knuckled the brim of his cap, and muttered, "Well, how about that?" By lunchtime, the egg had a guardian. Tall, alert, black-necked and stoic in that way only Canada geese seemed to manage. The mother, she didn't flinch when the students filed out onto the track for PE and jogged past. She didn't react when Coach Martinez blew her whistle too close. And she didn't budge when cheerleaders clattered past to the field. She simply sat, weathered the noise, watched. Some teachers voiced concern. What if she's aggressive? Maybe animal control should move her. Isn't this a liability? But Clyde, cradling a styrofoam cup of coffee and watching from the sidelines, said quietly, "She ain't hurting anyone." Perhaps it was the way he said it. Or perhaps, in spring, people are more forgiving of anything that patiently endures. In any case, no one moved her. She stayed. The days passed. Rain came and went, whispering in sideways bursts beneath the bleachers. A science teacher developed a new ritual, checking in on her during his morning prep hour, sometimes leaving her bits of whole-grain bread. She never approached him. He never tried. The students noticed soon enough. They always do. Whispers during passing period. "Hey, did you see the goose by the bleachers? She's literally still there. I think she lives here now." Someone named her Gigi. A name passed mouth to mouth, like a rumor with no real start. Even the younger teachers began saying it. "Watch out for Gigi," they'd say absently, as if she were just another feature of the school, like the broken vending machine or the loudspeakers that always crackled before morning announcements. Weeks snapped past. The egg hatched. 3 goslings fuzzed in down, stumbling around their mother's feet, tiny thunderclouds bobbing in the grass. There was a hush the first day kids saw them. Even the loudest group by the soccer goal grew reverent for a moment. A gentle awe, the kind only baby animals can summon, cooled the cafeteria's chaos.le. A sophomore newly arrived from a foster home 1 county over posted a photo of the goslings on Instagram with the caption, "Millstone has a mama goose. Now, goals." Nobody knew she had an eye for calm things yet, but her photos, muted, soft, slow, started getting shared. The goose was becoming known. But even stories that begin with hope are not safe from silence. One morning, the goslings were gone. No feathers, no sound. Gigi sat alone again, her body curled tighter, her head turned toward the bleachers, unmoving as wind lifted the grass in small waves around her. Nobody said they found anything. Nature, fast and indiscriminate, had simply taken its part. This was how it worked, Clyde said quietly at lunch that day. Nature doesn't wait for sentiment. But the students, they were different. Ellie posted a blank photo, just a patch of grass with the caption, "Hope isn't always enough, I guess." Some kids placed breadcrumbs near the base of the bleachers that week. Others just sat for a while nearby, not to interact, but to be still. It seemed like the only thing that made sense. The next week, Gigi flew off briefly for 2 days, then returned. Alone, no one quite understood that decision. Maybe it wasn't a decision at all. Maybe memory drew her there, or something gentler. We can't measure the scent of clover in the grass, the hum of hallway bells barely audible across the lawn, or the distant echo of a whistle at dusk. She simply came back, as if, in her mind, she still belonged there, and strangely, everyone allowed it. By the time the school year faded into final exams and farewell assemblies, Gigi was still there. Not always visible, but present in the background, like a forgotten lyric of a favorite song you can't fully remember but still hum anyway. Spring turned to summer. The track team finished their season. Cleats were packed away, lockers emptied, tassels flipped, and beneath the sun-warmed bleachers, carefully nested in the dust, Gigi waited. It started small. A glimpse through the window during third period English, just her shape, quiet and near the bike racks. Then again during lunch, standing statue still next to the flagpole as freshmen argued about playlists. She never made a fuss, but in her own steady way, she made herself known. By the start of the next school year, it became natural. Gigi on campus. No one organized this. No committee voted on Goose inclusion. She just ... returned, as surely as locker combinations were reassigned and the carpet in the library seemed somehow a little more threadbare. She was part of the school's rhythm again. Some mornings she stood sentry at the northeast corner, where the sun first touched the sidewalks. Other days she loitered near the cafeteria, watching the lunch crowd with the same impartial gaze she gave to sunrise. Occasionally, she'd cross the main lawn with absurd solemnity, forcing students to slow their pace behind her. A few tried to shoo her. She never rushed, and so, eventually, they didn't either. She earned a quiet respect that way no one could quite remember when the feeding started. Probably someone tossed a crust, and Gigi didn't object. Soon, breadcrumbs were offered like tributes, under the guise of "it just fell," or "I didn't want it anyway." Teachers clicked tongues, warned about stomach problems and wild animals, but none enforced it. Gigi had become something different. Not a pet, not property. More like a shared secret. She was sometimes moody, swatting her wings when someone got too close. Other times, she stood still enough that people wondered if she'd fallen asleep standing up. The faculty agreed she had personality. Not friendly, exactly, but present. She didn't love crowds, didn't chase affection, but she was there. You got the feeling she saw more than she let on. Ellie, now a junior and still probably the quietest girl in her row, kept posting about her. Not obsessively, just now and then. Simple pictures. Gigi surrounded by dandelions. Gigi standing in front of the fire hydrant like royalty. Gigi alone on the track at sunset. Her captions were funny sometimes. Security detail doing morning rounds and reverent at others. She waits, even when no one thanks her. The account grew. Not viral, just steadily followed by Millstone High kids past and present. Occasionally, a grad commented, "She's still there," and the reply was always some form of course she is." By the spring of Ellie's junior year, people started calling her the Goose Girl. Not to her face, not unkindly, just in passing to describe who was closest to Gigi. Once, a classmate asked her why she bothered. "She's the only thing here that doesn't need anything from us," Ellie said, barely looking up. "It feels fair to pay attention." Gigi showed up in more than Ellie's account. She started sneaking into senior quotes mentions woven between inside jokes. The art teacher found 4 separate pencil sketches of her pinned to final portfolios. A poetry student wrote a haiku, bent brown head in Springside walks, split to let her past know. One taught her pride, and deeper still, she became part of how kids marked seasons. Remember fall of junior year. Gigi lived by the science wing. She nested next to Building C last spring. Ms. Robbins said she hissed at her umbrella. In winter, she disappears for a bit. I always think she's gone for good, but then she's not. She wasn't claiming territory. She didn't belong to any one grade or group. She was just ... Gigi. A presence like clock towers or late bells, but definitive, roaming with that peculiar goose gait, head high, body swaying like she heard music no one else did. Sometimes she wandered close to sports fields, watching games like a disinterested aunt. Other times, she perched near the chorus building. Rumor was, she preferred the altos. Once, she halted a fire drill by parking herself next to the emergency exit. Kids filed around her as administration sighed into walkie-talkies. More than once, Gigi made it into campus tours. Oh, and that's our Goose. Don't pet her. She only likes Ellie. Prospective families smiled politely, as if all high schools had geese. They didn't understand, most wouldn't. But inside Millstone, Gigi had found a slot in the story-an. Unspoken paragraph between announcements and test weeks. A thread of consistency when everything else seemed to shift and scatter. Teachers resigned, friends moved away, courses changed. And yet, one Goose still posted up near the drinking fountain behind the art room every other Wednesday. She didn't listen when you were upset. Not in the way you'd expect, but students still sometimes talked to her, especially the quiet ones. Especially in between things after math tests, during spring break returns. They spoke, she stood still. It was enough, and by the time another year slid into its final months, it was clear this wasn't a novelty anymore. Gigi wasn't campus. Folklore, she was part of Millstone. Not the part that gets mentioned in pamphlets, but the real part. The kind that means something years later, that fall. During a windy lunch break, Ellie snapped a photo of Gigi standing perfectly centered on the school crest painted by the gym. Entrance, tail feathers barely brushing the blue edge. She added one word as caption, present. Gigi didn't grow old, exactly, but she did change. Imperceptibly at first. Her feathers, once brisk and satin sleek, gained a heavier sway in the wind. She walked a little slower, watched a little longer before moving, but she still came back. Each year, as if the campus was some invisible nest waiting for her return, and as she stayed, stories gathered around her like leaves in a corner. There was Ethan, a tall, awkward junior with a backpack that looked too small for his books. After his grandmother passed unexpectedly mid-semester, he wandered out during lunch and sat slumped against the far wall behind the gym. Gigi, unaware or uncaring, made her slow, steady way over and stopped roughly 4 feet from him. Close enough to be impossible to ignore, far enough to respect sorrow. He said nothing. She made no sound, but she didn't leave. 40 minutes passed that way, and though neither knew it, that was the only hour of that entire week Ethan didn't cry. Then, there was the prank, the kind of senior stunt that might have gone too far if it hadn't been done so gently. A group of drama kids and one kid from the yearbook committee had stitched together a bright red sash, sequined with the words Class of 2021, On a day Gigi wandered near the oak trees, two students very gently draped it across her back. For 3 minutes she wore it like royalty. The vice principal rolled her eyes so hard you could hear it, but no one made them remove it. They removed it themselves, respectfully, then shared a picture to the class group chat, captioned, "Our Valangostorian." The yearbook that summer included the image in a collage on the final page. No label, no explanation, just Gigi in her honorary regalia, mid-stride, like a walking comma in a sentence no one knew how to finish. Her nests were built and rebuilt, year after year. Sometimes they were tucked behind the music building, once nestled impossibly on top of a short, retaining wall surrounded by cigarette butts and stray leaves. She never raised another gosling. Threats were 2 present cats, storms 2 curious students. Still, she tried. Students left lettuce near her spot. The science teacher built a small sign, "Be kind, expecting mother." Someone laminated it. Sometimes things went wrong. One spring, a landscaper, new to the company and unaware of the law, raised her nesting place during early grass trimming. She'd flown off hurriedly. Everyone was beside themselves. Clyde found the necessaries hollow and said nothing, just rubbed the inside of his wrist like he did when he was angry. 2 days later, she came back and nestled in the same flattened grass. Every morning, Clyde brought a bit more hay, laid it beside her and said, "Sorry, sweetheart." Though no one else heard him, there were murmurs now and then. Principles changed. Safety policies were revised. A few faculty meetings ended with mention of wildlife interactions. But somehow, every conversation ended with a shrug. Someone would inevitably say, "She's not hurting anyone." And everyone else would nod like that, settled it. Because it did. Gigi's story by now wasn't just about her appearances. It was how those appearances stitched themselves into calendars, routines, quiet moments. She became shorthand. When things were hard, someone might mutter, "At least Gigi'll still show up." And they meant it, every now and then. A kid who had transferred in halfway through the year would ask, incredulously, "Is that seriously a goose just walking round?" And another student, sometimes Ellie, sometimes not, would reply calmly, "Yeah, that's Gigi," as if that answered it all. As if that was all you needed. During one of the art class critiques, a student presented a sculpture, a bent wire goose poised beside a scale model of the school's front steps. She called it resilience in flightless form. When asked why, she shrugged, "Because it's harder to stay than to leave." A teacher burst into quiet tears. She didn't explain, and no one asked her to. No one publicly claimed Gigi. There were no signs declaring her protected, no nameplates honoring her. But there was something unnameable about her place there, as if the school's rhythm would shift. Without her slow walks, her midday pauses in the quad, those odd hisses that startled but never threatened. And as the students moved forward year after year, exam to exam, they began to notice the things that didn't shift. Her presence was one of them. She was part footnote, part pillar. Even Ellie, a kid who lived in borrowed places she didn't decorate, kept a printed photo of Gigi taped inside her locker. Just a grainy shot of the goose, staring at nothing in particular, sharp-angled light, unbent neck. The caption written in Sharpie beneath it said, "Some things stay." That winter, during the late December storm, Gigi disappeared for 7 days. Kids whispered maybe it was her time, maybe a car, or a hawk, or illness. But on the 8th morning, as salted snow crusts were still melting in the corners of the quad, she reappeared, slightly muddy, slightly stooped, but unmistakably her. The hallway buzz that day held something sacred. People didn't cheer or make a scene. Instead, they watched through thick windows as she stopped beside the water fountain and took a long enough pause for someone to say, almost reverently, "Guess she's back." Ellie never meant to lead anything. Leadership wasn't something she sought. She was the sort of student who chose the second row in class, not too far forward, not too far back. She got a minuses instead of A's, nodded instead of raising her hand, but senior year brought something else. A quiet ache to do something that would last a little longer than a lab report or a captioned post. And Gigi, that once nameless goose by the bleachers, had already lasted longer than most. It started with a joke in homeroom. "We should put Gigi in the yearbook." Said mostly for the laugh, the oddity of imagining a goose next to headshots and club photos. But Ellie didn't laugh. Not in the way people expected. She just smiled slowly and said, "Why not?" The petition took shape that same week. Just a slip of paper at first, passed around the cafeteria with the heading, "Honorary Class, Goose, Official Recognition." Nobody expected it to work. But within days, it took on a momentum of its own. Seniors wanted Gigi in the yearbook. Because, well, she had been there for years. Through more exams, track meets, and rainy Monday mornings than even some of them. Someone pointed out that she probably had better attendance than half the student body. The art club offered to draw a charcoal portrait. The photography teacher approved a dedicated yearbook box on the last page. Ellie messaged Clyde to ask which day Gigi usually showed up near the flagpole so they could get a decent picture in soft light. He just replied, "Thursday, tell her." It's for a good cause. Not everyone agreed instantly. One math teacher muttered about setting odd precedents, but he didn't argue when Ellie spoke before the faculty board. Soft-spoken and steady. She doesn't know she's part of anything, but we all know. And it seems unfair to leave her out just because she never learned cursive. The motion passed, so the last few pages of the yearbook beat behind prom photos and scholarships. Winners held one small lavender box. In it, a grainy photo of Gigi mid-stride, looking confused but noble between two seniors grinning in caps and gowns. The caption read, "Honorary Graduate, Class of 2023, Gigi." That winter, Gigi was seen limping. It happened on a Monday, fog curling low and sharp at the edges of the quad. Ellie spotted her near the drinking fountain behind the band room, favoring one foot, barely lifting it clear of the damp concrete. She froze. For the first time in 100 posts, she didn't reach for her camera. Within an hour, the whispers had spiraled. "She's limping. Gigi's hurt. Is there like a vet for wildlife?" That afternoon, a student named Raj posted a Venmo link, Gigi Aid Fund. The caption read, "Let's fix our girl." By the next morning, $312 had come in. Not much, but enough. They contacted a local wildlife rehab group, and a gentlewoman named Mara showed up with a canvas bag and soft voice. She found Gigi exactly where Clyde said she'd be. 30 minutes later, she returned to the front office with a shrug and a half smile. "Mild sprain, probably stepped wrong on the fence line. She'll be fine, just don't let her chase anyone for a bit." The sense of collective relief that swept the school wasn't rational, but it was real. 2 weeks later, the senior assembly came, traditionally dull and predictably hollow. A slide deck, a misplaced microphone, glitter that never quite cleaned up. But this year, someone added something extra. Ellie and a few students, quiet ones, mostly compiled clips from their phones, for years of Gigi footage. No narration, just soft piano under 5 minutes of her wandering, dozing, pausing beside track lanes and exit doors, and then a final shot: Gigi standing between falling cherry blossoms in front of the admin office, captioned, "Sometimes she came back, just to make sure we did too." When the lights rose, there weren't tears exactly, but a kind of caught breath, a hush, as if something delicate had passed through the auditorium unnoticed until that final pause. Applause began slowly, awkward, then fuller. Someone sniffled. Someone else said, quietly, that was weirdly beautiful. By then, the idea had begun to spread, half whim, half wish. What if she walked at graduation? No full plan, no schedule. Just a sentence flicked into locker-side conversations, the kind said with a laugh that barely hides how much you mean it. We should let her cross the stage. No one said it would happen, but no one said it wouldn't. Clyde was asked first. His response, famously understated, was only if she wants to. Talks remained unofficial, barely whispered. There was no policy for this, no script. But word spread that Ellie would walk last. And if Gigi happened to be nearby, if she saw something she trusted, well, then maybe, just maybe, it could happen. The sky that morning couldn't decide who it wanted to be. Grey in patches, promising sun but offering drizzle. The kind of weather that made parents fumble for umbrellas they hadn't meant to bring, and made the folding chairs on the football field just damp enough to complain about. Still, the class of 2023 arrived in pressed gowns, matboard caps awkwardly pinned to curls and cowlicks. The band stumbled through their tuning, and the PA system let out its familiar sleepy hiss. It was the sort of ceremony small towns know how to make feel enormous. Handwritten name cards, speeches in triplicate, grandparents in lawn chairs. Ellie stood in the back row of alphabetical order, the hem of her gown brushing small weeds poking up through the turf paint. She'd rehearsed her smile. Not big, just enough to get through the walk and the handshake. Just enough to feel like the right kind of ending. The ceremony began predictably. Principal Alvarez gave her usual speech, metaphors about bridges and stars. A senior spoke about choices and second chances. The choir sang something halfway in key. People fanned themselves with programs. Time dripped forward. Then, 23 minutes in, not long enough for boredom, but just enough for restlessness. Something shifted. Near the corner of the bleachers, where the turf meets gravel, a ripple of motion caught attention. Just a few heads at first, whispered names. Pointing dot, Gigi dot. She wasn't rushing, wasn't dramatic, just walking, steady, from the parking lot side of the track, cutting at a diagonal, past the stacked hurdles and sound booth, her gait unhurried, wings tucked, head bobbing slightly with each step, as if to some ancient rhythm, a breath caught in a dozen throats at once. Clyde stood from his folding chair, hands deep in his pockets. No expression, just watching. The vice principal, alert and tight-lipped, took a step off the stage and motioned faintly, unsure whether to intercept, but Gigi didn't pause. Her direction was fixed not at the speakers or the crowd but toward the central aisle. She walked the white runner path meant for graduates, taking it like it had never not been meant for her. Ellie, already clocking the scene from her side of the stage, stepped one pace out, not dramatically, not making anything of it, just opened a space against the edge of the line, her hand dropping casually toward the grass. And Gigi ... turned, not abruptly, but as if she'd agreed to something a long time ago. They walked together. The students parted without being asked, a hush forming that wasn't fear or awe but recognition, as if something everyone hoped might happen was unbelievably happening now. Together, they reached the platform. The steps posed no real challenge. Gigi used the built-in ramp with familiar ease, as though she'd mapped it before. By then, silence held the field. Principal Alvarez blinked, then bent awkwardly, a large man, never quite used to small gestures. He looked at Ellie, then at Gigi. "Well done, graduate," he said plainly, and with more sincerity than he'd given to the last 20 students. There was no cue, no special note in the program, but the crowd began to clap, slowly, then louder, and then louder still, not polite, not bemused, but something trembling below the surface. Laughter threaded with something softer, a kind of applause that knows it's not just for today. Ellie stepped aside. Gigi passed the center point of the stage and waddled down the back ramp like she'd memorized her mark. She didn't linger, didn't pause, simply moved toward the oak trees as if she'd heard enough, as if tassels and tassel turns were someone else's story now. The clapping didn't stop right away. People kept watching, even as the next name was announced. Phones, halfway raised, not to capture, but to commemorate, as if, for just a moment, everyone present understood. This wasn't a stunt. This wasn't a joke. This was the end of something. And because endings so rarely go the way we hope, we cling to the ones that feel right. One more graduate had walked the stage that morning. She wore no gown, but somehow she wore everything that mattered. The story didn't end with the stage. News spreads fast in towns like Millstone, and within hours, the headline appeared in the local paper: Millstone Goose graduates with class of 2023. No one knew exactly who had submitted the tip. Maybe a proud aunt, a staff photographer, or someone from the yearbook team. The article was short, just 79 words, but it was read more than anything else that month. Other outlets picked it up. Regional news stations gave it a paragraph, some with gentle sarcasm, some with genuine delight. The goose who graduated became a trending phrase on one small social media corner. Someone on Twitter called it the only graduation story that matters this year. Ellie didn't retweet it, but she favorited it quietly from a side account she didn't use often. That summer, campus emptied like it always did. Desks stacked, binders forgotten. The halls took on that peculiar creaky stillness that only schools know. Gigi, as always, remained for a time, seen rounding the quad now and then, sitting near the back fence, mowing on dandelions, sometimes still, sometimes absent. But the sightings grew fewer. Near mid-July, a junior named Nina left a paper cone of oats by the cafeteria steps after summer practice. The next day, they were untouched. A science teacher spotted her that same week, just once wading through the long grass near the tennis courts. But then, silence. When August returned, bringing practice schedules and syllabus planning, an uncertain freshman, Gigi didn't. Students noticed. Quietly, they circled the places she used to roam, looked twice by the bleachers, paused near the drinking fountain. No sign, no feathers. If she was still nearby, she was staying far from the FOOTPATHS. Ellie had already gone college hundreds of miles away, far enough to turn familiar sidewalks into memory. Her final Instagram post before she left showed Gigi mid-step across a patch of morning mist. The caption said only, We didn't deserve her, but she stayed anyway. Time moved like it does, predictably, impatiently. Then, in early November, after the first storm blew through and lunch periods began to carry that sharp pre-winter air, someone painted a mural. No announcement, no permission slip. Someone with steady hands and soft vision stood in the dusk by the backside of the bleachers, where the paint was always a little peeled. And they created something small and almost reverent. A goose in soft silhouette, dappled brown, square cap on its head, the tassel drifting like a banner in the wind. Beneath its feet, a scroll unrolling beside a sprig of clover. Above its head, bold, careful letters. Class of GSE, Goose, School of Empathy. At first, faculty weren't sure what to do. Murals required approval forms. There had been meetings once about how spray paint wasn't allowed, but nobody could bring themselves to object. Maybe it was because of how the facing wall caught the sunlight just so in the afternoons. Maybe because the artist had swept the area before they left. No mess, no trace. Or maybe because, deep down, everyone could agree it felt finished. No one claimed credit. Not officially, but rumors floated. Some said it was an art student from the class of 2022 home from college. Others swore it had to be Rog, the guy who once ran the Gigi Aid Fund and who now worked at a print shop downtown. It didn't matter. The mural stayed. Ellie never saw it in person, but someone sent her a picture. A classmate from the track team. The text said, "Look who got tenure." She didn't reply right away, but 2 hours later, she posted the image. Echoing an old caption with one slight change, she stayed. And then we did too. Millstone High forgot some things: test scores, committee chairs, rules about hallway posters. But they didn't forget Gigi. Not really. Students still whispered her name during off periods. Teachers still warned, half joking, to watch for wildlife. And somewhere, tucked between grammar quizzes and lunch detentions, there was a quiet space where her memory still walked. Not loudly, never loudly, but present always, in the places no one thought to guard. Somewhere, in the unclaimed quiet of places we've forgotten to name, things continue even when we do not. The grass grows back, sidewalk cracks widen, a fallen feather flutters up once in the autumn breeze, then settles again without fuss, and someone walking by might lift their head, just for a moment, unsure of what they're remembering. Time has a peculiar appetite. It takes, and only rarely returns something in a form we can still recognize. But then there are the stories we hold in our pockets, not because they're important by history standards, but because they made the ordinary feel important the moment we lived them. Nobody at Millstone High remembers who taught third period chemistry 10 years ago, but they remember Gigi. Not in detail, not all of them, but in flashes. The brush of feathers by the flagpole, the echo of her waddling steps during a lunch break, the silence she brought with her, the kind reserved for snowfalls and sacred places. She didn't ask to be remembered. She didn't build anything, didn't say anything. She just stayed. And while she stayed, something quiet and unlikely grew around her. Her pause inside the rush, a breath held between the noise. The students she watched over have scattered. Some now have jobs, children, aching knees. Some still have a photo of her saved somewhere they've forgotten. Others wake on spring mornings and, for no real reason, think of a goose standing still under the cherry tree near the gym. They don't always know what to do with the memory, So they sip their coffee or start their cars or walk into their meetings and carry it inside them like a folded note never quite opened. Presence is like that. It leaves fingerprints on a life without leaving marks. Clyde retired the year after the mural appeared. No fuss, just left a paperclip chain of keys on the janitor's desk and walked out past the flagpole. He didn't tell anyone, but 2 days before his final shift, he brushed off the mural wall with a utility broom and muttered, something too soft for even the breeze to catch. Ellie, on visits home, walks past the school sometimes from the sidewalks. Far side, she doesn't stop, but she glances, and if no one is watching, she smiles. Not at anything in particular, just at the hollow where the bleachers meet the track, just at what used to be. She never tries to explain it. She's learned over time that some things stay because they don't know how to leave, and maybe somewhere not near a school, not near anything, there's still a brown-grey shape tilting her head against the sun, a feathered sentinel in a patch of tall reeds, listening not for applause, but for the steadiness of water moving past stone. We love our animals for what they bring: joy, companionship, fragments of ourselves made gentler through their eyes. But some creatures bring only their presence, nothing asked, nothing gained. They remind us that not all footprints are left behind out of design. Some just happen because someone decided to stay. So when a breeze stirs the weeds by an old field, or when sunlight hits a forgotten patch of grass, just so, there's always a chance she's still out there, quiet as ever, watching, not for recognition, but for the sake of being there when someone else needs stillness. Some say she was just a goose, and that's true, but the better truth is softer than that. She was a keeper of moments, a patient watcher, a little bit of found wonder in the middle of 1,000 unremarkable days. And in the long run, what else does a legacy ever really need to be?